It's 8:30. We do have quorum. Oops, thank you. We do have quorum. I'd like to call the Mayor's Leaders Table to order. Our clerk this morning will be Ms. Nicolina Verkar. Today's Mayor's Leaders Table meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. We don't have anyone joining us electronically this morning. We have no introduction of late items, Ms. Verkar. A motion for adoption of the agenda. Moved, Dave, seconded. God, my mind's gone blank this morning. Mark, sorry. And all those in favor? Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Donna, Dave, thank you. All those in favor? And the first item is the Council Communications, a work plan to develop an accord. As most of you know, Council adopted the motion that Council endorse in principle the proposed work plan to develop the Nanaimo Accord is attached to the Mayor's Leaders Table agenda dated May 16th, 2025. I think that's just for introduction, and we will move on to the actual agenda items, the Nanaimo Accord work plan development. Ms. Hayes, the ever energetic.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have just, first off, I want to start by thanking Dave and Bill and Colin for forming a little task force that's been working on what next steps look like and what the work plan looks like and putting some dates around that. And so today, unfortunately, I didn't get it to you digitally in time as I just signed off on it last night, but Colin has been working on what we're calling the Compass Initiative, immediate and near term work plan. So I've just given you all a paper copy, so my apologies, it's just kind of landing on your desk right at this very moment. But it is a broad-based outline of what we believe next steps look like and what we anticipate outcomes to be. It's really based on 5 domains, which are communication, coordination, design, strategic clarity, and contracting. So we've laid those pieces out for you, and I might ask Colin to lead us through a high-level review of those. Colin?
Sure, thank you, Donna.
Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. So as Donna mentioned, we just wanted to make sure that we had a picture in our head. As this table will remember, we're moving along a fairly aggressive timeline, wanting to make sure that we have this done by the end of the year so that we can move into the action phase immediately beginning in January. And so breaking it down across those 5 domains, communications, we've launched the process. We got together as a group, picked a couple of dates, made sure that we've identified some venues. Based on the map that this table created, we've built out now a communications list and should be sending out invitations for the first 2 work sessions. If not today, then first thing next week. And so looking at getting together then for a first meeting in August, which gives everybody plenty of time, not only to be able to prepare in advance, but also that if anybody requires us to show up in person, have a bit of a conversation with them and walk them through some of the backstory, that we're quite prepared to do that. Beyond that then, coordination, making sure that we have all the deliverables lined up and ready, that we know how we're going to be facilitating those sessions, the purpose of those sessions. The first one really will be to review a sort of skeleton of the Accord to make sure that it does reflect the shared values, guidelines, and ambitions of the collected attendees. The second session will be picking up on feedback that we receive at the first, and then building out some of those first identifiable projects, making sure that we are working on those that most align with the Accord and create the greatest amount of leverage. Item number 3, design. We'll start moving into that then, really about drawing up that skeleton of the Accord, the purpose, the shared values, the guiding principles, the common ambitions, and the commitments in the endorsement. Number 4, just to draw attention to it, strategic clarity. Really just wanted to make sure that folks remember this isn't a communications exercise. This isn't just branding for the sake of branding. This is going through to make sure that we all are aligned in our respective strategic priorities, and then identifying the projects that we want to move. If at the end we find ourselves in the position of being able to fill out some of those branding statements, like Nanaimo is the blank of the island, great, but that is not the first and most important intention of this initiative. Number 5, contracting. We've drawn up a draft RFP for some additional support to assist us, particularly as we move out of the drafting of the Accord and into the creation of the portfolio. And so I'm working with Dave Whitty to review the sort of structure of that, and then we will take it out to tender probably around mid-July. And so with that, I mean, I think that's running through it. If folks have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But really, it's just wanting to circle back to this table that since council's endorsement, we are moving forward with the work plan and everything is running on time.
Donna, please.
Thank you, Collins.
Thank
You will also see a couple pages attached, just kind of breaking down week by week what we're working on. So we've been pretty succinct in what we believe the deliverables are and what we need to actually achieve those. They will mean some working sessions in community. I believe I have secured us a venue to host those events. I just need to get final confirmation, then I'll share that with this group. We'd like as many members of this team to attend as possible, realizing that, that might not always be the case, but the August 25th date where we're going to introduce the idea of Accord and get feedback from those community members who were highlighted in the original chart that I presented will be a fairly important meeting to basically get those organizations engaged and understanding what the purpose is and how we want to move forward as a community on that. I want to say a big thank you to Dave, who's going to be working on the Accord for us and putting some of those thoughts together and then documenting those pieces to bring that together. Our September event with community will be basically presenting the completed Accord and be working on the work plan or the prioritized project document that will be attached to the Accord. So as I mentioned, if there are any questions, or as Colin mentioned, if there are any questions or any of these organizations feel they need a presentation from this table, that's why we've kind of set the date of August. So it'll give us an opportunity to meet with those groups who feel they would like a presentation up front rather than agreeing to come to a process that is already in stream. So that's what we're working on, and big thank you to everybody who's been working on this.
Thank you. Any tentative time on the 25th at this point?
We talked about, I believe it should be after lunch. So 1 o'clock till 3 o'clock.
Just want to put it in as a tentative.
Perfect.
Can I ask a question?
Please, Mark.
Thanks, Donna. The one thing that I think I brought up last time is that probably VIU, I would assume, be in the same boat about needing to go back to their boards to get support. So I didn't do anything with this given the timing of the council support, and then everything would go full from there. So in reality, I would suggest at least the school district, and I don't know about VIU, is not going to be able to get before their board until end of August or end of September, theoretically, to get support. So I'm just, not that there's any controversy particularly here, it's just that to invite the kind of the politician side from the school board, I would say, without context in August is not going to make a ton of sense, and I don't know how I get the context to them. So I just present that as a bit of a concern.
So I'll be upfront and say our port board doesn't meet again till the middle of September, so we're kind of in the same situation. The invitation is not, though, to those board members. The invitation is to, so for instance, at the port, it will be to our CEO and our VPs for them to participate in a process. So I realize that for those of us that have board, I think probably all the groups on our list have boards that need information to go back to. We will have done a whole bunch of the work to actually know more about the Accord. Staff would be updated on what it more fully looks like before they even go back to the board. I realize that that's the case.
Okay, great, thanks.
Very positive. And yes, I'm Mark's point around boards and direction, and this is why many people complain that it takes so long to get anything to happen at the public political level, because you've got so many people to report to and authorizations. But if we have what I'll call the working staff on board, things will move fairly quickly. And opposing this would be a bit like opposing, apple pie, I guess. It's July the 4th after all, so I can say that. Any questions? I must say that I'm impressed with what you've managed to do in terms of setting this out and laying out the plan. It gives everybody something to work towards and march to, and I think that's just wonderful. I'm happy to attend anything along the way, anywhere, anytime, just to let me know, because I think this is this is going to have a profoundly positive impact on the community over time. Anything further on the Accord work plan? We've got housing next on the agenda, but Dave, do you know where Bob is? Is he with
I
you,
do know
so to
where
speak?
Bob is.
Channeling Bob?
Bob is in South Africa
Oh, with Dave, yes, of
Yeah,
course.
with,
The other Dave.
and family and doing some safari travel. But I just want to, if I may, just for a moment. Yeah, I noticed when I walked in, I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I just want to speak to this. I've been around the block. I've attended council meetings across Western Canada, I advised municipalities across Western Canada. I've been recognized for that work. And I want to say this, that we're blessed, folks, who are listening, watching, and observing, and I think photographing perhaps, that we're blessed with this council, with the activity it undertakes. I say that because I know, based on experience, that needs to be said here. And I'm quite frankly tired of the constant second guessing that goes on in this community. This Accord speaks to future direction. A lot of the work that council does speaks to future direction, mindful of the fact, and I'd like to add this to the agenda if I may, about the broken financial situation that local governments face. And I've been in this business for 50 years, folks. I know what I see and hear and observe. I know and have been acknowledged for my advice. And I know good councils when I see them. I just wanted to say that. Thank you for your time.
Oh. Well, thank you very much. I much appreciate the positive message. I think, speaking as someone who sat in the provincial legislature, and I've used this quote before. It was David Zernheld, who was then Minister of Forests, and forgive the language, but I'll paraphrase it slightly. Walking to a caucus meeting one morning with him, and he turned to me with a level of frustration, just said to me, if people knew how GD hard it was to make anything happen around here. And that's the frustration. And I come back to what I said earlier in terms of the nimble response that I'm expecting from this. No pressure. But Dave's right, it is very challenging. And when you get a group of people together who are willing to do something and have some vision, because as many of us are reminded, this community, some describe it as on the edge, I think, but that has a sort of negative connotation. We are seeing interest in our community from across the province, certainly, where most of our growth is coming from, if you will, but also other parts of the world. I remind everyone that the Nigerian community in this town numbers 1,000 individuals, I'm told by the president of the association. 1,000 Nigerians in the Central Island Nanaimo area. What does that tell you about this country? And particularly with what's happening in the United States, we have to be prepared to manage and deal with all of this in the interest in a modern, liberal, stable democracy, notwithstanding the constant criticism and concerns of some people that are expressed from time to time. I'll stack us up against anybody. So, Dave, your words are very, very much appreciated this morning. On the housing front, I mean, happily, as most of you know, we're getting, when I say we, it's really the province, but with the support of the city, the facility on Old Victoria Road, the Rona site is underway and open. There won't solve the whole problem, and it's for a portion of the population, but it's certainly going to help, and with more to come. I think it's fair to say that the lobbying that's being undertaken by not just council by any stretch, but by community members and advocates, whether it's in the form of articles in the paper or things of that nature, it has drawn the attention of the provincial government, and we are seen, I think, quite appropriately as a priority because of the numbers and challenges we face. Our situation in terms of the housing for those who are in desperate need and the most vulnerable is worse than the city of Vancouver in terms of per capita approach. Not as bad, I'm sad to say, as Courtenay, which is even worse off, and you only have to go up there to see it firsthand. But at the same time, we are still seeing incredible interest in development, a number of units going up all over town, still investing in the community, but it's going to take a long time to meet those needs. Articles I've read lately would indicate that with the immigration is dropping quite deliberately as a result of federal policy, but we are still in a bind for many, many people. Folks are living in crowded conditions that how shall I say, don't meet the expectations or beliefs of most Canadians. So we have a ways to go, but on that front, it is somewhat positive. Now, I'd be remiss, and Mr. Sims may go nuts when I say this. Bob has suggested, and others, that we have a housing coordinator, a special position in the city. That does present some fiscal challenges for us, and also in terms of what would be achieved by it. But I want to assure the committee and those who are taking the time to listen today that there's a lot of work undertaken by current staff that may not have a designation that or a title that could be pointed to, but it's not as if nothing is happening. Is there any comment on anything that Dave and I have had to say? Happy to hear it. I suspect this is going to be a fairly short meeting this morning.
I do have one thing I'd like to.
Oh, please. On this topic or in the round table?
Business side.
Okay. All right, seeing none, on to the round table. Dave, you're first off, please.
Thanks. So this is not surprising, but it is about our reality. And I mean, I am an urbanist. I have been practicing in this area a long time, and I've just seen the change in local government finances because of the reality that we face. So 80% of us now live in urban areas. When the Constitution in 1867, it was flipped and less than 20% lived in urban areas. So we have a structure that doesn't and can't deliver to our urban environment from a financial perspective because of the tax structures that we have. And I think about this a lot and talk to my colleagues about it. Somewhere in the order of 12% is what cities share of out of 100%. It's even less, is it? Okay, I'd heard maybe even 8 to 12, but I went to the other 12%. That's just the way my head works. But of the 100%, and yet 80% of us live in urban areas. Well, how does that work? Well, it doesn't, right? I mean, it works because people make it work. But in terms of long-term requirements and infrastructure, you talk about that a lot, and I get it. It just troubles me that we can continue to burden local government in a whole bunch of ways, not the least of which is a very unfair tax structure. So, and not to, I'm just putting this out. It's something that just seems to me to be so obvious, and I'm assuming there must be conversations about this, but I've always worked in my life about never assume anything and begin at the beginning. And that served me so well. So, never assume anything. At one time, our GST was 5 or 7%, right? And then in, 10 years, 15 years ago, it was pulled down to 5%. So we've been to 7% in the past. So I thought, you know what? If I were the federal government and, there's a need to figure out some kind of way to assist a local government that's delivering the majority of services in the country, there's got to be a way to deal with it that might work. So I'm thinking, for what it's worth, 1% GST dedicated to local government. Surely FSM is having those conversations. If they're not, they should. That would generate $12 billion. $12 billion at 40 million people is $300 per Canadian. In the case of Nanaimo, $33 million. Over 10 years, $330 million. You could do all the infrastructure you need well. You could do some social housing with that. You could do whatever, but the point is that, and I've done enough study on the housing side and what's happened. We retrogress in terms of supply housing for those who can't afford it, that we had at one time 14 to 15% of our housing was social housing. We're now down to 3.5%. I've got a great slide where the Finns have gone the opposite direction, and so they don't have homelessness, right? Whereas they had outrageous homelessness in the 90s, and they invested in subsidizing social housing. We've gone the other direction. All of that to say that we can't expect municipalities to be able to address the breadth of needs that 80% of us need living in urban situations. So I just throw that out there, food for thought. But you know what? Like 1% GST takes us to 6%. If I were the federal government, I'd go to 7 and put 1% towards the military. But you know, it just seems to me just so bloody basic. But anyway, not to talk about that. But from a policy perspective, I think there's solutions out there. And I thought, well, you know what? The Mayor's Leaders Table is a place we can have a conversation like that. I'll just throw it on the table, and I'm sure maybe others are already, well, I thought of that, and it's well underway, I would hope. But anyway, it just seems so obvious to me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to jump in first, and pardon me for smiling from a political perspective, and you tend after a while in public office to think that way. It's actually a very sweet proposition from the federal government's perspective. You get to increase taxes, but you blame it on the municipal politicians who have to bear the political burden of doing so. Having said that, as I think most of you know, the AVICC, UBCM, et cetera, have been, Federation of Canadian Municipalities have been calling on the federal government to recognize exactly what you're talking about this morning in terms of the fiscal disparity between the ability of municipalities to deliver an increasing, I will call it level, I won't say burden, but level of services without a corresponding increase in revenue sources or alternatively, a share of revenue collected by either provincial or federal governments to assist them to do so. It is very much a real challenge. I was notoriously tagged way back when in 1990, I guess, when I talked about, believe you me, if you want more services, we'll have to pay higher taxes, and that created quite a furor. And apparently Van der Zalm gave this wonderful speech in the legislature that was so funny, mocking me, that Mo Sahota said I actually cried with the laughter. It was so wonderful. So I'm happy to go back there again and say it's a very interesting proposition, and I think it's the kind of thing that I don't know if we missed the deadline for UBCM this year, Mr. Sims. I think
UBCM, I think we need, it is
Yeah.
already set for resolutions, but I will,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, the FCM is Federation of Canadian Municipalities is definitely having this.
Dave.
And what really brought to my attention this time, you're talking about, I mean, where are the revenue sources? And you're just struggling right now, and you know, and you're looking at DCC's revamping. Another municipality I think maybe it's Vancouver Vancouver's again looking at this. And it's like, the struggle is like, your pot is this big, and the sections in it are little pots, and at some point that's going to break, and local government will break, because then all of the pressure is on taxpayers, and the basis that, you know, with property tax is the key part of it, which is just a pathetic way to try and structure taxation. And so it's just, for me, I just, again, it's an area I do know. I just worked with enough municipalities and seen them struggle over the years. There isn't any creative way internally to be able to do it other than through something like GST. And I'll just speak to this and again, you know, I go to your plots, right? Going there in the fall again, going to Switzerland again. You know, I've talked about this. They don't have homelessness. They have all the full infrastructure, the trams, everything's running perfectly. Why? Because their tax system's different. They have income tax and corporate tax in the cantons of Switzerland. They've totally reversed. In the federal government then, its mandate is, you know, broader, but it's not about the specifics of local government. Local government looks after local government. They tax locally as they need, and the income and corporate taxes vary across the country. At the end of the day, this overall Swiss taxation is a third less than Canada's. At the end of the day, even doing it that way, significantly less than Canada, according to OECD numbers. I've seen them. In a presentation I do, I talk about that. So, you know, it's that. So the model of a different taxation system, we know it works really well in those countries. It's a federated state, but in that instance, we'll never go down that route, or maybe should we? But nevertheless, that GST, it seems to me, has an opportunity to be quite useful.
Well, I think it's interesting also that you're seeing now a lot of reporting from various sources and commentary about Vienna is the sort of lead example where the housing is largely publicly owned. I must say, as a native-born Canadian, goes against my grain. I'm still excited by the concept of private ownership. Sorry, it's just the way I was raised. You're probably not going to disabuse me of that attachment. Not everybody else is how shall I say, wed to that attachment in the same way, nor are the expectations the same. But, you know, they've overcome that with a system, as I understand it, that basically allows you to inherit, if you will, the family home in the sense of having the right to continue to be a tenant. And there was a recent piece now, where was it? Was it in the, I can't recall, you know, young professionals who have owned and gone back to live in what we would think of as public or subsidized. CBC, I can't remember exactly.
I have that file, absolutely.
Yeah. The younger folks are much more open to this, and it's certainly something to, I think, as a country, we really have to look at very seriously, because exactly what you said, we basically got out of the National Housing Strategy in the 90s for reasons around fiscal concerns related to the federal deficit and the debt, a rising debt. But part of the social disorder that plagues us everywhere is a direct result of that. So it's time to take some dramatic looks at things, and I'll be even more controversial. As an example, in terms of our regulation and our approach to dealing with problems, I was discussing this with Council's AA just yesterday in passing conversation. The firefighters are, as an organization, both nationally, locally, et cetera, very opposed to the concept of multi-story buildings, and this is a very general comment, with only one set of stairs. Now, there are very good safety reasons to support the concept of two egresses and two accesses for any building that is more than a story high. On the other hand, we moved to that because, in a general way, we lived in a period where fire was a serious danger and a fairly regular occurrence, and people died. And there was very, very good reason for that approach. Now, given the efficiency of fire departments, building code changes, et cetera, maybe you have to step back and ask yourself, is the inability to house people literally, give them a roof over their heads as opposed to living in the street, does that potentially outweigh the benefit that might flow from eliminating, depending on the size of building, et cetera, that second set? Or alternatively, does everything require an elevator? The building code is now being changed to basically make every suite accessible. Well, I'm hoping I'll be dead before I require some of that support, but nevertheless, these are big questions that require a different approach. And so your comments this morning around a dedication of GST, and I would go a tiny step further and suggest that if it was tied just to capital construction in and of itself, it would be enormously beneficial, because unless what I've ever read about economics is capital construction is the biggest boost to the economy. Increasing wages or in and of itself or something like that, it doesn't have nearly the impact that capital construction does in terms of benefiting employment and generating taxation. As I say to everybody, if the government hands it out, so to speak, for capital construction, it gets it back many times over in terms of, well, GST, PST, income tax, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, never hurts to have a little blue sky conversation once in a while. Donna.
I'm of a mixed mind, only because I think before this group were to make a recommendation of any type, we should explore all of the, my only comment would be is that, you know, I'm worried about rising costs and affordability. Like, what does an increase in GST mean to cost of food? And, but there is on other tangibles that people would buy as part of their grocery bill. Soap, right? Shampoo, there's GST on all of those things. The other piece of it that I think people don't realize is, as an example, when a doctor rents an office space, they have to pay GST, but they are not entitled to claim it back. So when we did this GST to HST piece, where it went from, it went to 12% everybody pay, that meant that the medical system, because who ultimately pays the doctor is through MSP and our taxes, had to go up by, and it's a 12% add-on. So right now, when a doctor pays their rent or buys gauze and tape to bandage you up in an office, they pay GST on those things and they can't claim it back because they have a special rating, because they can't charge their patients GST on the visit, right? So there's just other there's other implications that worry me. One of the things that does worry me about tax, and I do think there should be more transparency at government. Lately, because a lot of my conversations are focused on healthcare, my focus has been on the provincial government. So where is PST going, which is 7%? If you watched lately what the Fair Care Alliance was doing and what happened at the BC Chamber Conference, and we had a policy on the table around the agreement between the federal government and the provincial government for transfer of $200 billion over 10 years to the provinces, and BC has only negotiated the first 3 years. Well, where did that 3 years of BC's percentage of the $200 billion, where did that go? I'm sure it went into healthcare, but it wasn't based on infrastructure costs when we're fighting for a new hospital, and it wasn't based on population, right? So our policy that came to the table was base that money, if those transfer payments are coming from the federal government, put it into infrastructure and base it on population so it gets distributed on a fair and equitable basis. So my feeling lately in those discussions, property transfer tax. Specifically, where does that go? Why is it not reinvested in the communities in which it was generated? I think there needs to be more transparency in terms of where the funding goes. One of the conversations I'm at right now is the province of Alberta has no health authorities, right? How many health authorities do we have in BC? It's quite a number. They're costly. Their administration costs are expensive. Is there and I don't think the prairie provinces have health authorities either. So are we spending all of this money tax-wise on administrative costs when we should be putting it directly into healthcare where it's ministerially distributed based on population again? So my caution is I would never want to increase costs of living to an economy that's already struggling and to our families that are struggling to pay for things. But I do believe that there is fat at the government level that transparency would expose, and right now our health authorities are all going through an audit, for instance, to show, where they should be at. I think we need to support more transparency on where is our money actually going? Like, what are you actually spending it on? When I see some of the water plant in Vancouver and what they've gone over in costs, you could have built our whole hospital for that. It's just in their cost overages. So I'm more concerned about this transparency at both levels of government. I completely agree the municipal government is not getting more responsibility is dumped on their plate every single year. And we see it in droves about what they expect us to take care of. And yet no additional funding is really being attributed to that. And so that's just some of my random comments about what's going on with taxes. And I do worry about the efficiency of government, both federally and provincially, and where those funds are being distributed. And I think there needs to be more attention paid by the public to those things.
Dave?
Oh, no, great comments. I think, for me, the whole system needs to be reevaluated. But the problem is, we've been talking about that for a long time. And so this is kind of the reality is that local governments cannot afford to invest in infrastructure. What we're doing is we're delaying the burden. It's kind of like this new Trump thing, right? That's going to be in 20 years, it's going to be chaos there trying to pay that off. And at some point, we have to realize that investing in local government is the first line that really has to happen. And these things have to be built and maintained. And in the absence of having an initiative like 1% GST, local government's going to have to raise taxes somehow. And you can redistribute that property tax, I mean, but that's a small amount, right? It's not going to do anything significant. It's important to do and trace that, but for me, this is about taking a long-term view and making a long-term solution, because if we don't, we're just going to nickel and dime, and I won't be around in 20 years to see the mess, but it'll be one terrible mess.
I would argue it's a mess right now. My question to your worship is, I know at the Federal Municipalities Conference, what was the motion on the table this year about funding coming back to municipalities? I know through speaking with Councillor Eastman that there is a push at that level, but I unfortunately cannot remember the details of what was at
I
that
can't recall
conference.
either. I didn't go to FCM.
Okay, there is something, I know there's something on the table. I was there, but only for the port
Yeah.
night.
We have Councillor Hemmons in the audience. I'm wondering if she can illuminate us.
I don't, I'm trying to pull it up right now, but Donna, you're right, the big push at FCM this year was to increase, I'm sorry, thank you, Nikki. I don't have it immediately in front of me, but the big political push at FCM was to increase funding to municipal governments. I don't think they went specific to solutions like
So they didn't
Dr.
give
Woody's suggesting.
no recommendations on how to accomplish that?
I don't think so. I'll get it for you though.
Okay, that'd be great, thank you. So there is, I know that there's something at that table. It would be interesting for us to take a look at that.
Yeah. And I wasn't suggesting the table actually act on, I don't know, I'm just
generative
throwing out that,
discussion.
yeah, there's an idea.
Cast thy bread upon the waters, and it shall be returned to thee tenfold. Anything else in the round table? Mark, please.
Just to give a couple of updates from the board. So the way that, just for everyone's edification, the way that capital funding works for school districts is we get a minor amount on a yearly basis for the kind of basic maintenance of what we do. So $3.5 million-ish to maintain all of our facilities. So we pull some more out of our operating fund, but because of cuts over the years, that's relatively minor. So most of our maintenance for 30-odd facilities is based off of that small number. But, there's a big but. We have a number of capital envelopes that are solely funded by the Ministry of Education, well, I guess Ministry of Infrastructure now. And like that's, again, the strength, I think, of this table, and maybe this is where the accord goes, right, is because if we have a broken system, if we're at the front of the line of the broken system, well, then we can benefit because the capital projects that we ask for, if we're all one voice, we get there. So we apply for environmental projects, for transportation projects, for seismic projects, for these major projects. And so our submission date for a yearly basis is now. We find out next March, essentially, whether they're going to approve it, and then we start to plan for the year after. How the kind of two projects to highlight that would have an impact on an obvious impact on the community are one, our continued request for a replacement of NDSS. Our board passed a motion and will be going to community partners to seek support. I know there's been support in the past, but there'll be, that letter. The nice thing is they had a bit of a discussion about, well, is this in competition with the hospital? But not really. We're talking 10-fold difference in value or 20-fold difference in value, so it's there. So that's the one project. The other project, and working with Donna actually and her team that we've applied for, is approximately 100-seat childcare facility to be built at the Dufferin Elementary School, former Dufferin Elementary School site. On the green space that's there next to the hospital. It can't be disposed of by the board because it's a crown reverter, but it can be used for school purposes, which includes childcare. We wouldn't run that, but it would be focused on hospital employees. So that's now into submission as well, and I know there's been support. So that's the kind of capital side. One thing, and perhaps it ties to housing, certainly ties to the federal government, is we are seeing, unfortunately, weak enrollment at the K level. So we've been talking to demographic folks in Victoria, and the federal government have achieved what they were seeking, and BC looks like it might shrink, literally shrink, or get close to shrinking for the first time, essentially, in kind of its recorded growth history. because of the federal government's shift in the way they do things. Combine that with the fact that it's unaffordable to have children anymore for many, many people, we are now seeing that. And so for us, so some of it's also just this generation of folks is going to wait till the last minute to enroll their kids. And so thankfully our numbers are going to come up from where they are, but it's really, we're not going to meet our targets for that young age. So not a big deal for 1 year, but you times that by 12 and we'll be back at a resource issue from a school district perspective. And of course for us, it's really geographically disparate. So we're opening a school in the north. It's needed. But then in the south, like if Sandstone doesn't get rolling, we've got schools shrinking. And so it's an interesting dynamic. So we have some heavy growth continuing. Our secondaries are continuing to be relatively strong because as people move to Nanaimo, what's happening is they're bringing slightly older kids. So it's not quite the K population is down, but we do get some pockets up. So that's where we're at. We're contemplating how we can deal with that, but ultimately 3-bedroom townhouses throughout this region that families can afford to move into are going to be a big one. Last thing, and a thank you to staff, to Jeremy and to Dale's teams, but Wellington secondary's expansion, because ironically we're dealing with a heavy influx in our secondary populations, record time for the building permit. And so we got it 6 times as fast as we got for portables, frankly. And so now some of that's on us, I will say, but really express appreciation. Unfortunately, and again, not on the city, we're likely going to miss a second. We'll be able to open it second semester, but we won't be able to offer expanded services second semester because it's going to open a couple of months into second semester. But appreciation to staff of the city because that process where you can hire your own expert and there's reliance on that, game changer for us.
Might have been a complete submission.
Well, that too, yes. Like I said some of it's on the school district. This was an expression of appreciation for how quick that happened. So, but the thing for us, it means that we can actually make decisions for September of 2026, sorry, that will have impacts across the system in a positive way for capacity for kids, so.
Thank you very much for that. We'll certainly pass that along. Donna?
If we're allowed to talk about any topic, can I talk about healthcare for a moment?
Go.
I just actually want to comment on Mark's comments about, and which comes back to support how incredibly important this accord process is. So one of the major issues facing Nanaimo Regional General Hospital and Central Vancouver Island with respect to recruiting family doctors and recruiting specialists is the lack of childcare. And I think it was at this table that Mark and I first connected about this conversation. And to see the school district stand up in a leadership way and take this on, I don't think I can speak highly enough of what adding 100 daycares, and that's not all they've done. They've helped out in other ways through the family division, which has allowed us to recruit new family doctors to our area. I think when we think about healthcare, we just think, hey, it's going to be there when we need it. I can tell you the further I get into it, and just when I think I must know everything that's going on there, then something else pops up. You know, sitting in my MSA meetings with the doctors, I'm always expecting these high-level questions like, so when's the province going to give us the money for the tower? Instead, I have doctors standing up saying, I can only work part-time because I can't find childcare for my child. And so that's partly why we're not getting an influx of some of those professionals. They don't come here when there's nowhere for their 1-year-old or their 2-year-old to actually get childcare and get good childcare. And so, like, a huge thank you from me to Mark and from the healthcare, our healthcare group. We are so excited. Island Health is so excited about what this means. I can tell you that they're also having this conversation in Victoria and in Port Alberni and in Courtenay and in Comox. And in all of those situations, they haven't been able to find a strategic partner who will support them. Whereas Nanaimo will stand out as this example of, look how community and various groups realized there was a problem and came together to resolve the problem. So the 100 seats that we hear Mark talking about, you know, that is a huge amount of doctors and medical staff, particularly as cancer is opening at the end of 2028. And I can tell you, I see them digging holes across the road every day for getting started there. These are the kind of things we're going to see from the Accord, and they are game changers to this conversation. So excited about that. But giving a quick update is that this past month, Island Health has concluded their KPMG study on cardiology and what that means to our region. I think we all know that Central and North Vancouver Island live below the standard of care when it comes to heart health. One of the recommendations, although it is not number one on the list, is a cath lab coming to our area. I can tell you that we have a group working in the background about what that actually means. I'm sure everybody at this table understands that we could build a building there, but if we have no cardiologist to actually operate in that facility, it's just a building. And so we're actively working on what a full cardiology program looks like to our community, how that gets staffed, what recruitment looks like, how we make Nanaimo distinct as a tertiary center to other areas. I attended the Hospital Foundation AGM last year. We historically had the best fundraising year we have ever had. It was exciting to hear some of our other tertiary programs give presentations. So cardiology will hopefully be our second tertiary program. We only have nephrology or kidney care right now, working on cardiology very hard, but we heard from neurology and from gastrointestinal about creating tertiary programs for those specialties as well, which would fall in right after cardiology. It's exciting to hear what's happening in our community, but by no means do I want to give the impression that these things are happening by themselves. There is a huge groundswell in our community to make these things happen. We have to think outside of the box here for anything to happen here. It would be nice if there was just this standardized program and every community just put in your program, and you think, and I'm sure Mark can attest this, you think you put NDSS in, we've got this process, it should just happen, right? That doesn't happen here, and it doesn't happen here in healthcare. So right now, the Hospital Foundation is going to be working on a study about where a cath lab could go and how we can do it in a different way than other communities have done it. Because if we wait for the tower, we're still at least 10 years away. I recently found out that while the RHD, our Regional Hospital District Board, has taken a leadership role and agreed to pay for the business plan, which is approximately $10 million for our new tower, there's no notional fund. I don't even know. Notional funding sounds like fairy tale funding, but apparently we need notional funding to get our provincial government to even speak about the hospital tower, even though it was a political promise in the election. We got no notional funding in this previous budget. So Fair Care and our partners are working on how do we get notional funding in the next budget. I realize it's a struggle when we have a provincial government projecting a $9.4 billion deficit. Trust me, that didn't include the cut to the carbon tax. I'm hearing those numbers are upwards of $12 billion. This needs to be on our provincial government's radar. It was a promise in the election, but how do we hold their feet to the fire? So we are working at all those levels behind the scenes. Island Health, the study on cardiology, is a first step. It's statistically driven. It does show the need for those of us living north of the Malahat. And now we're thinking about creative ways to make that happen. So there is lots going on. I'm in a healthcare conversation every single day. Interestingly enough, I was in Burnaby yesterday, in Vancouver yesterday, meeting with the Vancouver CEO and board chair for their Port Authority. Their CEO sits on the Burnaby Hospital Foundation. So it was interesting to compare notes. They're also getting a new hospital. It was a very eye-opening conversation. They weren't aware that we were only funded 60% by the province here because they get 100% funding. To me, that sounds like we're a deal. Right? Construction costs are going to be relatively the same. Obviously, building in Nanaimo is a deal for our provincial government. But even hearing how their fundraising is going and what programs they need, healthcare is in crisis in our province. And so I'm pretty proud of our group out of Nanaimo, partnering with our municipalities, partnering with a lot of community groups, partnering with our school districts. We're creating great change. So that's what's going on.
Very positive, and just so everyone understands, on the other side of the water, though, they get the full funding for transit, and that's the deal. Yes, the capital, British Columbia has all these interesting historical differences, including the whole regional district system, but we won't spend time this morning talking about that. But just in a general way, I think it's fair to say that we all very much appreciate the work that you have undertaken with respect to healthcare in the area. Because it is a challenge, and I'm not picking on Dave when I say this, but Dave and we've met the enemy and he is us. It's the seniors population and the rising population when you use the biggest portion of your healthcare dollars, and we're a growing demographic, unfortunately. Frank Nay's happy welcome to the sun porch of Canada is not necessarily proved to be a good long-range policy, particularly when I hear Mark on behalf of the school board indicate we're not getting enough kids into K. We need those folks, because when Dave and I do actually retire fully and we'll need care. And if we don't get some folks in the system, we won't have anyone to care for us. Anything further? If not, the next meeting date, I'm just looking at the proposed date of November 7th, which would be in accordance with the calendar. That seems a long ways off, particularly in light of the schedule this morning on the Compass Initiative. So, and I'm happy to take comment or suggestion here. I'm thinking something sooner if possible. Donna?
I could see us maybe doing something in October. Our Accord Initiative dates right now are August 25th and then September 23rd. That would give us a draft accord to look at. And I would say preliminary conversation, I'm looking at Dave, preliminary conversations on the prioritized projects outcome. That would give us that, we could at least be looking at that documentation if we were to do something maybe middle of October.
I think that's a little more reasonable. Ms. Ricard?
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff can take that suggestion away and send out a follow-up communication to find a date that works for a majority of the members.
What we can do is we can leave November 7th in the schedule.
Can I
Regardless.
suggest,
I
I returned from Europe on the 20th of October, I think.
Okay.
So if we could meet, I'm good even the next day. I don't get jet lag, so I'm good.
All right. We'll see if we can work on something that works. All right.
21st, 22nd, 23rd.
All right. Motion for adjournment? Moved Mark, seconded Dave. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.